We've talked about Jaguar, Audi, Citroën, Lamborghini, Peugeot, Volkswagen, and now I'm turning my attention to Seat. 10 cool Seats which you may have never heard from, of course, the iconic Spanish brand, a brand which itself had a huge task, especially after World War II, of reinvigorating the economy of Spain, and we're actually going to get more into that with one car in particular. And of course, for the super petrol heads who are always scouring the internet for the unsung heroes type machines, you might have even heard of all 10 of these. For those who are maybe more casual fans of Seat or new to the petrol head scene, I really do hope that at least a couple of these, if not more, might be new to you and end up being cars that you do love. And for me personally, there are definitely more than a few cars here which I'm a big fan of. And speaking to that point, let's jump straight into number one, because this one, for any Forza Motorsport 2 fan, you definitely will be familiar with. It is the Seat Cupra GT, the closest thing you could argue to a full-on Seat supercar, Audi-powered, a 3-litre twin-turbo V6, about 1100 kilos, 500 horsepower, 440 foot-pounds of torque, and although it's more commonly considered to be a concept car, which of course it initially was in around 2003, it was, in fact, raced. And that's something which you don't hear as much chatter about. It was raced mostly in the Spanish GT sphere, so not quite, the absolute top tiers of racing, which are going to be in most people's mouths all the time, but still, it did get the chance to race. It had around 17 events, from what I could find, and it actually achieved a second place finish, which is not bad at all. It only raced for a few years, and they were built on kind of a customer order basis for smaller teams and individuals who wanted to race. So again, it's not like it's a top tier contender, but a very cool car. And when you do just occasionally see it in a game, probably most notably in the earlier Forza titles, it is a hell of a thing to use. We're staying on that track of crazy Seats though, because the next one is certainly that. It's a vehicle which had more potential, you could say, than the Cupra GT, and unfortunately didn't quite get the chance to show it. Of course, Seat has a rich history when it comes to rally, a point which we're going to revisit in future as well, and there's a little vehicle which you've probably heard of called the Ibiza, and also in a classic sense, it is probably, you could argue, their single most famous model. Designed to be a bestseller in the world of rallying though, well, back in the day in particular, a lot of early Seats were very Fiat-based machines. Again, a point that we're going to return to later on. This one was very close to the Panda 4x4 in terms of what that would have been capable of in rallying, and of course the Panda was used. The approach which they took to this one though, the Ibiza bimotor, which as you can kind of tell has two engines, one per axle, each with its own gearbox, and as you can imagine back around the 1980s and the Group B era, that was an interesting challenge for a car to have two different engines, two different gearboxes, and trying to get them as synced up as possible. Apparently that was kind of an issue, to say the least, where the front engine would consistently be running quicker than the rear one. So in terms of crazy performance, don't expect it to be, a Suzuki Escudo, Pikes Peak, or anything crazy like that. And unfortunately the car was a bit of a victim of bad timing as well. Nowhere near as crazy looking as a lot of the Group B and Group S cars, but speaking to that crossover, this car really did unfortunately fall right between that crossover point, wherein it was the time period where Group B was being phased out, and Group S kind of just went down the drain with it, so the car ultimately never had that much of a chance. Ultimately it only had the chance to participate in a few domestic level events, which is really a shame, because if nothing else, it's certainly wacky compared to a lot of the other already crazy cars at the time. The next one takes a bit of a step back in terms of crazy performance, but it's cool in terms of what it means for the brand. It's the 1953, so far older, and that's the key here, the Seat 1400. This, as I mentioned just now, is a direct result of their Fiat-based early models. This was incidentally based on the slightly earlier, around 1950, Fiat 1400, visually almost identical, and it really was this car, which, to go back to the intro of the video, that was the hopes and dreams of Spain, if you will. After World War II, this was a big deal. Seat, as a brand, needed to bring production and manufacturing and cash back into Spain, and it achieved it, because initially they had a workforce of over 900 people. They were building 5 cars a day, which ain't bad at all for the 1950s, and only a couple of years later in 1956, they were producing about 10,000 cars a year. Of course, it had a couple of facelifts and evolutions, but I wanted to include this one because even though it's not that special of a car from a motorsport or performance perspective, it's an incredibly important car to Seat as a brand, and more often than not, as you'll see through a few of these videos that I've done where we've talked about super early or initial incarnations and concepts of iconic cars, a lot of these don't actually get talked about that much, even by fans, so I think they do deserve more attention. The next one's a case of really cool potential, which was never going to go anywhere to begin with. It's a badass looking car, and if this thing had have been produced, and let's say it as it is, if it had even been an official teaser, which it wasn't even that from what I can find online, this would have been a modern cult icon in the hot hatch scene, the Seat Ibiza F2. Visually speaking, you can see exactly what they were going for, using the actual aero spec of the F2 Rally kit version of the Ibiza in a more road-going kind of homologation special sort of vibe, as a throwback to Group B and that kind of stuff. And underneath, apparently, it was pretty much just a normal Ibiza, and although information doesn't exactly abound for this car, from what I could find online, it seems that it wasn't even sanctioned by Seat. It was just basically one dealership or one group of people who just tarted up a Seat Ibiza to show it off for customers and attract more attention. They even apparently, and this is just from a Facebook comment from somebody who claims to have been there, so take it with a grain of salt, but apparently this dealership was even saying that if people put down like 30-40 grand, they would actually build them one, and somebody did, so they kind of had to do it. So I guess if that is accurate, there might well be one of them somewhere, although where it is anyone's guess, and even if you were to find it, chances are it's probably not actually that special of a car underneath. It's basically just an Ibiza with a wide arch kit, some spacers, and some cool looking aero, which still I think would have probably been popular given how badass it looks. The next vehicle is one of those which will definitely come up if you look up cool concepts or cool cars from Seat in general online. It's the 1999 Formula, a really cool looking, more modern take on Seat as a brand, and you can really see their design coming into its own in that modern sense in the Seat or Cupra that we know them as today, and certainly through the 2000s. The design process for this car even had involvement from Julian Thompson, who was involved in the Lotus Elise design, of course, so certainly getting the right people for the job in there by the sound of things. Its name is actually directly taken from the Formula Nacional, which is a massively important racing circuit for Spain. Mid-engine rear-wheel drive layout, 2-litre straight four, about 240 horsepower and roughly 900 kilos. Of course, it didn't reach production, and unlike a couple of the others which we're going to talk about in this list still to come, I kind of think it's a shame that this one didn't happen, because although by this point, of course, it had Volkswagen oversight, it wouldn't have really challenged anything from Volkswagen, because if you think about it, they had Skoda, they had Seat, they had Volkswagen themselves, Audi, Porsche. I don't really see where this car would have stepped on any toes. I guess you could sort of see it as a rival to maybe an Audi TT at the time, perhaps a Porsche Boxster, but even then I don't really think so. This could have been a really cool alternative to stuff like Lotus or the Vauxhall VX220 or even something much rarer like a Renault Sport Spider, and I think it really is a shame. This is sort of a missed opportunity here, but whatever the reason, of course, it didn't reach production. The next vehicle takes a huge backstep in terms of performance because quick it definitely ain't, but it is significant because this was Seat's first electric concept car, the Toledo E, but it was built around the time of the 1992 Olympics, which of course was held in Barcelona. And apparently Seat actually built a huge amount of cars. Around 2,000 cars were provided to ferry people around. They even gave special edition cars with certain goodies to gold medalists. And despite the fact that this car had literally an extra half a ton, 500 kilos worth of batteries and even a plug-in socket behind the front grille, it only had about 40 miles of battery range and had a 0 to 60 time of something like 30 seconds if I recall correctly, so not exactly quick. All is not lost though when it comes to this car not being that interesting, because the reason why I've included it on the list is not only because this was about 27 years earlier than their actual first electric car, so really did lay the groundwork there, but also the Toledo itself, you could argue, is even more important than this, because that, which came out of course in 1991, was the first Volkswagen Seat vehicle, and that, electric or otherwise, is a huge step in their history as a brand and directly leads into what they are today. The next one is another really missed opportunity in my opinion, and unlike a lot of the others on the list, it's a missed opportunity in a way that isn't anywhere near as crazy. It's just kind of a shame. It's a very obscure concept car compared to a lot of the other ones here, which aren't exactly the talk of the town in many cases anyway, called the Conto T. And this to me is a missed opportunity because just look at this thing. Although of course opinions will always differ on design, I think if this had have been produced, given how relatively subtle and believable its design is from a concept car perspective, this could have easily been a fantastic Spanish alternative to stuff like the Vauxhall Calibra, the Ford Probe, the Ford Cougar maybe as well, the Peugeot 406 Coupe, a lot of cars which people really do love these days and are coming back into the realm of being cult classics. I think this really could have been that for Seat. They initially started developing it in 1989 as a 2+ Class 2, the drag coefficient was really good, 0.27. It was fitted with a panoramic glass roof. They even built a year later a convertible version in red, I believe it was, instead of yellow. So yeah, the car had some kind of intention clearly of reaching production, but they didn't really take it anywhere. It had some cues like the front grille, which was carried over into stuff like the Toledo, but I really do think this is a massive missed opportunity, even if it wasn't all that quick. Let's say it shared the same underpinnings with the Toledo, for example. I really do think this would have been a popular car, and certainly these days, if you look at stuff like the Cougars, the aforementioned cars that I said earlier on, I think it would have been a car that was, if not consistently in the limelight of fandom, probably would have come back around, as many of those cars have. Our follow-up to that is definitely one of my favourites on the list, because it's based very closely on a vehicle which I've already liked for a long time, and based on their prices, at least here in the UK, a lot of other people seem to agree with me. The Volkswagen Lupo GTI is a really cool little kind of super mini meets hot hatch with up around 120 horsepower. Did you know though, there was almost a Seat version? Of course, the Seat Rosa, very obviously based on the Volkswagen Lupo. This one though was the 2001 Seat Rosa Racer concept, and it is exactly what it looks like, the Seat version of a Lupo GTI. 125 horsepower from a 16-valve 1.6 engine. Of course, it's more stripped out with the bucket seats and the spare wheel compared to what a production version would have been, so probably a little bit lighter than the Lupo, at least here in concept form. The closest we actually got to a sporty version of the Rosa was about 100 horsepower, so not a huge amount off, but certainly not as cool as this, and it's a really cool looking little thing in my opinion. The next one by design is almost a couple of cars rolled into one, called the Seat Tango. This one is all over the place. There are three primary versions. There's the Tango Cabriolet, which is kind of that smaller, very bull-nosed, open-top design. Of course, that didn't really go anywhere from a production sense. But then there's the wildest looking version, there's the Roadster, sometimes referred to, it seems, as the Spider version of the Tango, which is a very like aero, salt flats, racer looking design. But then there's the Tango Coupe, and all of these were produced around 2001. So although at the time Seat's cars didn't look like this, in particular that Tango Coupe with a very BTCC super touring car kind of look to it, most definitely did inspire what was to come. You could justifiably say that this coupe version got pretty damn close, given how close to this the Seat Leon very obviously was in around 2006, so a few years later, but still you can definitely see the inspiration there. And I think that these three, with their wacky and wild designs, they really do show the more like real world spirit of most concept cars. You know, you're never going to buy a car that looks exactly like that, but you can see like inklings of what's to come in the future. In the case of these three, they're pretty wild looking. Of course they were never going to reach production, but at least the coupe version kind of did, in a very abstract sense. And last, and definitely not least, this is a vehicle which I feel at least a few of you will be familiar with. You'll certainly have seen it before, even if you didn't know the full story, and it's a car which I think deserves more attention given how iconic all of its peers are. It is a WRC car from Seat, the Seat Cordoba, which in my opinion is not only a fantastic looking car, but it very clearly had a lot of intention behind it from Seat. We already talked about the fact that they have plenty of rallying in their history, and although they did refine some of its issues and ideas over three evolutions of the car around the late 90s into the early 2000s, it just wasn't really meant to be. The car actually made its debut in the Rally Finland of 1998, and it ran up to about the year 2000. It seems like kind of 2001 at a push, but about the turn of the millennium. It raced in about 37 or so different events and had actually 3 podiums, so not bad for the highly competitive world of WRC. Certainly when you kind of just burst into the scene, hit the ground running, as they certainly did, compared to these really well-established rivals, not just the obvious stuff like Mitsubishi and Subaru, but even like, you know, Toyota Corolla, Skoda later on as well, still again from that Volkswagen group. And unfortunately the car just kind of had a couple of teething issues in Evo 1 form. They fixed a lot of those issues, especially when it came to revising the cooling system for the car, revising the aero as well. They added some extra winglets, revised the rear spoiler, and apparently it made the car better. It was more competitive, clearly with some podium finishes. It had potential, and they got some good drivers in there as well. A few of the people that they wanted they couldn't quite get, and although as you can tell I'm not going to fully get into the story of the car here, this is definitely one of the ones which there is a lot more information about if you do want to look more into it, and if you're a fan of the way the car looks, this is definitely one I'd recommend looking into more. Ultimately, around the time that Seat changed their CEO, it was kind of just abandoned, which really is a shame, because even if the Cordoba hadn't continued, maybe if it just evolved into using something different, an alternate history could have been pretty cool. I mean, imagine where we could be now, for example, if like the more modern shape Ibiza or maybe even a Leon had been used in WRC. You can kind of imagine imagine how those cars would have looked, and that could have been pretty awesome with these bright yellow Seats racing against the more muted colours of a lot of the other teams. Sometimes raced, sometimes rallied, usually had a shorter life than they deserved, but all, in my opinion at least, either notable or seriously cool in the case of a few. So if you do find or know of some extra ones which you believe deserve to be here, maybe that I overlooked, absolutely put them down in the comments. And it goes without saying, but if this is the first video of mine that you've watched, I definitely recommend checking out the other episodes, and of course you can find all of those together in one playlist by clicking the link right below in the description. But I'll see you next time, and for now, thanks for watching.